I still remember the night because nothing about it felt normal. The diner was almost empty. It was late, and the rain was drumming against the windows. A steady, endless rhythm. The lights overhead were buzzing, casting a sickly yellow glow on the worn linoleum floors. It was the kind of night where time feels slow and heavy, like it's wading through mud. I'd been working doubles all week, and my feet were aching, my mind completely exhausted. All I could think about was getting through the rest of my shift and falling into bed. Then, the bell over the door chimed, and a man stepped inside. He didn't enter with a loud bang or a burst of confidence. He was just quiet. He wore an old dark coat and a cap pulled low over his eyes. His shoes were worn down, but they were clean. He looked like someone who was trying to disappear, to fade into the background. At first glance, you might think he was poor, or at least someone forgotten by the world. But something about him made my chest tighten. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was more like a silent warning bell ringing in my gut. A feeling I couldn't explain. He didn't look around the diner or try to make eye contact. He just walked silently to the darkest booth, the one tucked away near the back window, half hidden in shadow. I grabbed a menu and my notepad and walked over. The plastic of the menu felt cold in my hand. When I asked him what he wanted, he didn't answer right away. He just looked up at me, his eyes studying my face as if he needed to know something important before he spoke. It was an unnerving, calculating gaze. Finally, he said, "Coffee and eggs." Plain, his voice was calm, almost too calm. It was the kind of voice that belonged to someone trained to hide every flicker of emotion. As I poured his coffee, my tired hand slipped, and a small splash hit the worn surface of the table. I apologized quickly, my face flushing with embarrassment. He just smiled, a small, fleeting curve of his lips. "It's fine," he said. "Accidents happen." Most customers say something like that, but when he said it, it sounded less like a reassurance and more like a profound lesson. That's when I noticed his hands. They were resting on the table, fingers curled loosely around his empty cup. The skin was rough, calloused, and his fingers were strong. These weren't the hands of a man who sat at a desk all his life. These were the hands of someone who worked, who fought, who survived. As I turned to leave and put in his order, he spoke again, his voice low. "You work hard," he said. The simple statement caught me completely off guard. People don't usually notice that kind of thing, or, if they do, they don't say it. I gave a small, tired laugh. "I try," I said. He just nodded slowly. "Hard work is rare these days," he replied. Something in his tone made the words feel heavier than simple small talk. It felt like a judgment. As I walked back to the kitchen, I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't a creepy or threatening stare. It was more like curiosity, mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. I shook the feeling off and got his food. A few minutes later, I brought him his plate of plain eggs and toast. He thanked me, looked down at the plate for a long moment, and then looked back up at me, his gaze intense again. "You ever wish your life went differently?" he asked. I froze. My hand, which was about to reach for the coffee pot, stopped midair. That's not a question strangers ask in a diner at 2 in the morning. I managed a soft, uneasy laugh. "Doesn't everyone?" I replied, trying to keep it light. He just stared down at his food, pushing a piece of egg around with his fork. "Not everyone gets a second chance," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The diner suddenly felt colder, and the sound of the rain against the windows seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just refilled his coffee cup in silence. As I leaned over, my eyes caught something strange. Under the sleeve of his old coat, just for a second, I saw the edge of a watch. It wasn't an old watch. It wasn't a cheap one either. I'd seen enough wealthy customers come through to know the difference. The glint of polished metal and fine leather was completely out of place with his worn-out clothes, his quiet demeanor, and the whole story he seemed to be projecting. It didn't match the man who wanted to be seen as a forgotten nobody. I said nothing. My instincts screamed at me to just walk away. He finished his meal slowly, deliberately, as if time meant nothing to him. When he finally stood up, he placed a few bills on the table. It was way too much money for coffee and eggs. I tried to give some of it back, telling him he'd overpaid, but he gently pushed my hand away. "Keep it," he said, his voice firm. "You earned it." Then, he leaned a little closer, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear it over the buzzing lights. "Don't tell anyone I was here." My heart skipped a beat. Before I could even think to ask why, he had turned and walked out the door, disappearing back into the rainy night as quietly as he had arrived. I stood there for a long moment, just holding the money, my hands shaking. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me jump. At closing time, as I was cleaning his booth, I found it. A small, folded piece of paper, tucked neatly under the salt shaker. It had been left there on purpose. I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a short, simple message. "Tomorrow. Same time." There was no name, no explanation, nothing else. I should have thrown it away. I should have forgotten the whole thing, dismissed it as a weird encounter on a long night. But I didn't. Because deep down, a part of me knew that my life had just brushed against something dangerous, something powerful, and I had a gut feeling that this man was not who he pretended to be. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old apartment building sounded like footsteps. Every shadow in my room seemed to take on a shape. I kept seeing his face in my mind, calm, careful, watching. I didn't know it then, but this quiet stranger in a diner was someone the world was talking about, someone they were hunting for. The next evening came slower than it should have. I arrived early, earlier than usual, telling myself it was nothing, just curiosity, just a strange customer, but my hands shook as I tied my apron. The diner felt different, like it was holding its breath, and just like the night before, it started to rain. When the door swung open, my heart jumped. It was him. He wore the same coat, but his cap was different, cleaner, newer. He walked with those same quiet steps, but this time, he looked around, as if he was checking who was watching. He sat in the same booth. I took a moment, gathering myself, before walking over. As I reached the table, he looked up and smiled. "You came back," he said. "So did you," I replied. He nodded. A small, knowing gesture. "I hoped you would." I asked what he wanted. "Same order," he said, "but this time, sit for a moment." I glanced around. The diner was empty except for the cook in the back. Cautiously, I slid into the seat across from him. For a second, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped against the window, filling the silence. Then, he leaned forward, his voice low. "You didn't tell anyone, did you?" I shook my head. "Good," he said, the word hanging in the air. "Trust matters." That word, trust, it stayed with me. Why was he so secretive? Why all the secrecy? I asked, my own curiosity getting the better of me. He took a slow, measured breath. Because people see what they want to see. And when they think they know you, they stop seeing you asterisk. His answer just confused me more. What did that even mean? Before I could ask, he reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. It wasn't cracked or old, it was expensive. Way too expensive for a man who couldn't afford a meal yesterday. He placed it on the table, screen facing me. On it was a news article, a photo of a man standing on a brightly lit stage, surrounded by cameras and adoring crowds. The face that made my stomach drop, I'd seen it before. On television, on billboards, in magazines. My mouth went dry. That man, the one in the photo, it was him. Just cleaner, sharper, brimming with confidence. I looked up from the phone, back at the tired stranger in my booth. My voice was barely a whisper. "That's you." He nodded. "I'm not hiding," he said. "I'm resting." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt tight, like the air had been pulled right out of the room. This was one of the richest, most famous entrepreneurs in the country. A man whose name sparked heated debates online. A man with unimaginable power. And he was sitting in my diner, ordering eggs and bacon. "Why are you here?" I finally managed to ask. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Because no one here wants anything from me." I let out a nervous laugh. "Everyone wants something from you." "Not here," he insisted. "Here, I'm invisible." He started to talk then, really talk. He told me about the crushing pressure, the endless meetings, the decisions that could ruin lives or save them. He talked about how every smile aimed at him was measured. Every conversation, a transaction. He said he'd gotten to a point where he couldn't even trust his own shadow. So one night, he just left, walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back. No security, no assistance. He just wanted to find out if kindness still existed without cameras rolling. I listened, not as a waitress serving a customer, but as one human being listening to another. Then, he asked me something that changed everything. "Why did you help me yesterday?" I told him the simple truth. "Because you looked tired." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. "That's why I chose you," he said. Before I could even begin to process what "chose you" meant, the diner door creaked open again. Two men walked in. Dark coats, sharp eyes, serious expressions. The entire atmosphere in the room shifted, became heavy, charged. The stranger stiffened beside me. "Don't look," he whispered, his voice urgent. But it was too late. I had already looked. The men were scanning the diner, their gazes sweeping over every corner. One of them locked his eyes right on our booth. My heart started pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. The stranger smoothly slid his expensive phone back into his coat. "If they ask," he said, his voice barely audible, "you don't know me." I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The two men walked up to the counter and ordered coffee, but they didn't drink it. They just stood there, watching. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a bomb. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Then, one of them spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "Sir," he was talking to the stranger, "we need to talk." The stranger stood up calmly, as if he'd been expecting this all along. He placed a wad of cash on the table, far more than enough to cover the bill, and a generous tip. He looked at me, his eyes holding mine for a long moment. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. Then he turned and walked out with the two men, leaving me alone in the silent diner. The door closed, and the room felt vast and empty again. But my world was not. Later that night, long after my shift ended, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, my heart still racing from the events at the diner. The message was short, just 4 words. "You passed the test." My hands trembled as I read it. A test? I didn't know I was being tested. I didn't know that my simple act of kindness was an audition. I didn't know my life was about to change forever. As I stared at the screen, another message came through. This next one would ask me for something I never could have imagined. Something no waitress should ever be asked. And I knew, deep down, that saying yes would pull me into his world for good. The world of secrets, power, and danger. And I had a feeling I was about to say yes. I stared at my phone for a long time. "You passed the test." Those words just kept repeating in my head. I didn't reply, not right away. I went home, locked the door, and checked the windows twice. I told myself this was completely insane, that I should just block the number and forget everything. But curiosity is a lot louder than fear when you feed it slowly. My phone buzzed again. "Meet me tomorrow morning. Same place." Before opening, I barely slept that night. Every dream felt heavy, full of shadows and footsteps. When morning finally came, the sky was a deep, oppressive gray, the kind that feels like it's pressing down on you. I reached the diner before sunrise. The lights were off, chairs still stacked on the tables, and he was already there, sitting in the booth. There was no disguise this time, no cap, no coat, just a simple, clean, sharp shirt. He looked different in the daylight, older, more human. "You came," he said. I just nodded. I didn't really know why I was there, but I was. He gestured for me to sit down, so I sat. He didn't waste any time. "People around me think I'm untouchable," he said. "They think money protects everything." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "It doesn't," he told me about betrayal. Partners who smiled to his face while secretly planning his downfall. Employees who sold stories to the press. Friends who vanished the moment he stopped giving them what they wanted. He said power attracts attention, but kindness that attracts truth, and that's why he came to the diner. I finally found my voice and asked him what he wanted from me. He paused for a moment. "I need someone outside my world, someone no one would suspect." My stomach dropped. He slid a thick folder across the table toward me. Inside were documents, filled with names and numbers. I didn't understand most of it, but he explained. "These papers," he said, "proved that someone very close to him was stealing millions, using his company to ruin lives." "Why me?" I asked. The question hung in the air. "Because you're honest," he said, "and invisible." That word, invisible, it hurt more than I expected. He asked me to deliver the folder to a lawyer. Quietly, no press, no record. I stood up. "I can't do this," I said. He nodded slowly. "I hoped you would say that." A gentle smile touched his lips. "It means you understand the risk." I asked him what would happen if I said no. "Nothing," he replied. "You go back to your life." I looked at the folder again, sitting there on the table. And then I thought about my life. The long shifts, the dreams I had buried so long ago. I thought about how tired he looked, and how lonely. I sat back down. "I'll help," I said. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, everything went wrong. As I left the diner with the folder tucked under my arm, a black car slowed down beside me. The window rolled down, and I saw a familiar face. It was one of the men from the night before. He smiled. "You're braver than you look," he said. My heart was pounding against my ribs. He told me to get in. I refused. He leaned closer, his voice low and threatening. "You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." I took a step back, and he drove away. I ran. I didn't go home. I didn't go to work. I went straight to the address the stranger had given me. The lawyer was waiting. When I handed him the folder, his eyes went wide. "This changes everything," he said, his voice a shocked whisper. I left his office shaking. That night, the news broke. A massive investigation. A powerful executive arrested. The name was everywhere. The stranger texted me. "You did well." I finally replied, for the very first time. "What happens now?" 3 dots appeared, then stopped. Then they appeared again. "Now, we see who you really are." I felt a chill run down my spine. The next day, he would make me an offer that no one from my world ever receives. And saying yes would mean leaving everything, and everyone, behind. The next morning, my phone rang long before the sun had a chance to rise. I squinted at the screen, the bright light piercing the darkness of my room. Unknown number. Again, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach as I swiped to answer. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm, steady, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. As if my entire world hadn't just been flipped upside down. I couldn't bring myself to reply right away. My own breath was loud in my ears. "Are you safe?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, a hint of urgency breaking through the composure. Yes, I managed to say, but my voice shook, betraying the fear I was trying so desperately to hide. Good, he said, the relief almost palpable. Then listen carefully. He didn't waste any time. He told me to take the day off work, to not even think about going to the diner. He instructed me to pack a small bag, just essentials, he specified. Clothes, documents, nothing sentimental. That last word stung a small, sharp pain in my chest. Sentimental things were all I really had. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What was happening? Because today, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost grave tone, you stopped being invisible. An hour later, a car was waiting outside my building. It wasn't what I expected. Not a black tinted window SUV. Not something flashy or attention-grabbing. It was just an ordinary sedan. The kind you see 1,000 times a day and never notice. It blended in perfectly. The driver didn't speak a word to me. He just nodded once as I got in, and we drove away in a heavy, unnerving silence. As we moved through the city, I watched the familiar landscape transform. The streets grew wider, cleaner. The buildings started to stretch towards the sky. Monuments of glass and steel. We finally pulled up to a quiet, imposing office building. Security was everywhere, a subtle but constant presence at every corner, their eyes missing nothing. My heart pounded against my ribs. Inside, he was waiting for me. And this time, there was no disguise, no shadows, no distorted voice over a burner phone. This was him, the man from the news screens, the man whose face was known across the world. Seeing him in person, so close, made my legs feel like they might give out from under me. The sheer power he radiated was overwhelming. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice, the same one from the phone, but richer, more resonant, in person. He led me down a long, sterile hallway and into a private conference room. The door closed with a soft, final click. And then, he told me the truth. The full, unvarnished truth. The investigation wasn't just about one corrupt official. It was bigger, far bigger than I could have ever imagined. It involved multinational companies, government agencies, a web of deceit that spanned continents. The money was moving like water, a relentless, untraceable current flowing through the dark corners of the financial world. The package I had delivered, the one I thought was so insignificant, had been the key. It had started a chain reaction, a domino effect that was now toppling giants. And because of that, powerful, dangerous people would be looking for the weakest link in that chain. They would be looking for me. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I never meant to be part of any of this, I stammered. I was just a waitress, trying to make ends meet. I know, he said, and his gaze was surprisingly gentle. That's why you survived it. You weren't greedy, you weren't ambitious, you were just doing your job. He then made me an offer. It wasn't for money, not at first. It was for something far more valuable, protection, a new life, and a job. He wanted me to work with him, for him. Not as a waitress, he clarified, and not as bait to be dangled in front of his enemies. He wanted me to work with him as someone who understood people, someone who noticed the small details others missed, someone who knew how to be invisible when they needed to be. A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. You think I belong here? In this world? I gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling window. It felt like a different planet. He looked at me with an unnerving seriousness. You already proved you do, he said simply. His confidence in me was both terrifying and strangely flattering. He laid out my choices, clear and stark. Option 1, go back to my old life. Go back to the diner, the late nights, the meager tips, and hope the danger simply passed me by. Hope that the men who were watching me would eventually give up and disappear. Or option 2, step forward, step into his world, learn, adapt, and change. What does stepping forward mean? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't sugarcoat it. It means long days. Hard truths. It means seeing things you can't unsee, and it means you will never, ever be anonymous again. I walked over to the massive window and looked down at the city sprawling below. Countless cars moved like tiny insects, so many lives intersecting, so many stories playing out all at once. And in that moment, a profound realization washed over me. There was no going back. Nothing was ever going to be normal again, no matter which path I chose. The innocence of my old life was gone forever. The choice wasn't between my old life and a new one. It was between survival and becoming a ghost. I thought about the diner, the smell of grease, the constant ache in my feet. I thought of the men watching me from across the street, the cold fear that gripped me when that car slowed down beside me on that dark street. My old life wasn't safe. It was just a different kind of prison. I turned back to face him, my decision made. A strange sense of calm settled over me. I accept, I said, my voice clear and firm. He smiled. It wasn't a wide, triumphant smile. It wasn't a proud one either. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Welcome, he said. By that evening, everything had changed. My phone number was different. My address was a penthouse apartment in a building that required 3 levels of security clearance to enter. My life, as I knew it, was over. I stood on the balcony of my new home, a safe place, and watched the city lights twinkle to life. It was beautiful, a sea of diamonds scattered on black velvet. But safety, I was quickly learning, came with a heavy cost. Because once you step into a world of power, a world of shadows and secrets, it never lets you leave quietly. It owns a piece of you forever. The next chapter of my life, my real training, began with the first lie I was asked to tell. And it was in that moment, as the words left my mouth, that I began to understand that in this new world, even something as simple as trust has a price. And it's a price you pay over and over again. My first day didn't start with training, or paperwork, or even introductions. It started with a lie. They told me my name would change, not legally, not yet. But in rooms like this one, names were just tools. They were keys, and mine was about to unlock a door I never knew existed. "You will listen more than you speak," he said, his voice calm and steady, like a quiet river that could hide dangerous currents. "You will observe, and when asked, you will say exactly what we agreed." I nodded, even though my stomach felt like it was tying itself into 1,000 knots. There was no backing out now. I had made a choice, and this was the consequence. They placed me in a quiet office. Everything was muted, the colors on the walls, the plush carpet that absorbed every footstep, the frosted glass that separated me from the rest of the world. It was a space designed to soothe, to lull you into a sense of calm, but for me, it felt like a cage, a very beautiful, very expensive cage. People walked past the glass walls, their faces set with purpose. Important people, busy people. None of them looked at me twice. I was invisible again, just like I had been in the diner, but this invisibility felt different. It felt strategic. Later that morning, he came in. The billionaire. He looked tired, the kind of deep, bone-weary tired that sleep couldn't fix. It was a look I was starting to get used to seeing on him. "There's someone you will meet today," he said, his voice low. "Someone who thinks you are someone else." My heart started to hammer against my ribs. "Why me?" I managed to ask. My own voice barely a whisper. "Because," he explained, "they trust faces that don't belong to power. They see someone like you, and they lower their guard. They don't see a threat." He explained that a former business partner was coming, a man who suspected nothing about my true purpose, yet somehow knew too much about things he shouldn't. My job was simple: sit in the room, smile, and listen. If asked, I was an assistant, new, quiet, the perfect, unassuming fly on the wall. The door opened, and a man walked in. He radiated confidence, almost too much of it. It was a loud, boisterous energy that filled the room and seemed to suck all the air out. He smiled at me, a quick, dismissive glance, the way you might look at a piece of furniture you don't particularly care for. And then they talked. Well, they talked. I just sat there, trying to breathe normally. They discussed money, deals, losses. The conversation was a whirlwind of numbers and names I didn't recognize. The man, the ex-partner, was careless. He slipped up, dropping small details, letting careless words hang in the air for just a moment too long. But I was listening. I caught everything, every hesitation, every slight shift in tone, every piece of information that didn't quite line up. I was a sponge, soaking it all up. Then, just as the meeting was winding down, he finally looked at me directly. His eyes, sharp and appraising, landed on me. "And who are you?" he asked. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. My mouth went dry. My palms started to sweat. I could feel the billionaire's gaze on me, steady and unreadable. I took a shallow breath and said the name they gave me. The lie slid out smoothly, more smoothly than I ever could have imagined. It felt foreign on my tongue, but it sounded convincing. The man nodded, satisfied. His attention snapped away from me as quickly as it had come. When he finally left, a wave of relief washed over me, so strong it made my knees feel weak. My hands were shaking. "You did well," the billionaire said, his voice holding a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. But I didn't feel like I did well. I felt sick. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face, heard my own voice spinning the lie. And that's when a terrifying thought hit me. Lying once is easy, but lying again is even easier. And that scared me more than anything. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I settled into a new routine, a life of shadows and whispers. I learned how to read rooms, how to decode the subtle language of power. I learned to hear what wasn't being said, to understand the meaning behind a pause or a glance. I learned that real power whispers. It doesn't shout. The billionaire checked on me often. He was always respectful, always kept a professional distance, but I could feel his presence, a constant, silent observation. It was like living under a microscope. One night, working late in that quiet, sterile office, I gathered up the courage to ask him something that had been eating away at me. "Do you ever regret this life?" He stopped what he was doing and looked at me for a long, silent moment. I thought he was going to ignore the question, dismiss it as naive. But then he spoke. Every day, he said, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of that admission. But regret doesn't change responsibility. His words hung in the air between us. In that moment, I thought of the diner, of the simple clatter of plates and easy conversations. I missed the honesty of that life, the straightforwardness of it all. I missed being myself. Then, just as I was starting to get used to this new normal, everything shifted again. One evening, he asked me to stay late. His face was more serious than I'd ever seen it. "There's a problem," he said, and my stomach immediately dropped. "Someone is watching you." The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. The past, the life I thought I'd left behind, had caught up. He explained the truth. By helping him, by stepping into his world, I had made myself visible. Visible to his enemies. Visible to dangerous people who would see me not as a person, but as a pawn. A tool to get to him. Suddenly, my life changed. Security was increased. My movements were restricted. The little freedom I had was traded for a gilded sense of safety. I felt trapped, more than ever before. I looked at him, the man who had pulled me into this vortex, and asked if this was the price. He just nodded slowly. "Power always costs more than it gives," he said. It was a bleak and simple truth. That night, I stood alone by the massive window in my new, secure apartment, looking out at the city lights. I finally understood. I was no longer just a girl from a diner helping a billionaire. I was part of a system, a complex machine of power and secrets. And systems like this one don't let you go easily. I had stepped onto a chessboard, and now, I was a piece in play. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was about to be tested again. But this time, it wouldn't be a test of how well I could lie. It would be a test of loyalty, and the choice I was about to make would change everything, especially how he saw me forever. The test came so quietly, there was no warning, no dramatic high-stakes moment. It was just a question, asked in a calm, steady voice. We were sitting in a small, sterile meeting room, just the two of us. He looked at me differently that day. Not like a boss, not like a protector. He looked at me like someone who was deciding exactly how much trust to give. "There's a file," he said, his voice low. "One that never, ever leaves this building." He placed a thin, unmarked folder on the table between us. It had no labels, no markings at all. "Inside," he continued, "is information that could destroy someone. Someone you know." My chest tightened, a knot forming in my stomach. I didn't reach for it. I couldn't. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I need to know where you stand." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "You can walk away right now. I'll make sure you're safe. Your old life can return, just like it was, or ... You can open the file." And that's when I understood. This wasn't about the file. It was about me. My mind flashed back through all of it, the lies, the secrets, the long nights staring out of windows wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I thought of the diner, that very first night, the way he'd simply asked for eggs, as if the world wasn't a complicated, dangerous place. With a deep breath, I reached out and opened the folder. Inside were records, messages, undeniable proof. And then I saw the name. It hit me like a physical punch. It was the cook from the diner, a man I trusted, a man who joked with me during the slow late-night shifts. He had been selling information, watching, reporting on me. I felt sick to my stomach. He just waited, watching me process it, completely silent. Finally, I looked up. "Why him?" "Because people underestimate him," he said, his voice flat. "Just like they underestimated you." Tears burned the back of my eyes. I pushed them down. "What happens to him now?" "That," he said, leaning forward slightly, "depends entirely on you." I closed the folder, the click of the cardboard echoing in the silent room. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Is there another way?" I asked, my voice shaking. He paused. "There always is. But it always costs something." I made my decision. "I'll talk to him." That was clearly not the answer he was expecting. He studied my face for a long moment, searching for something. "You'd risk yourself for him?" "Yes," I met his gaze. "Because once, someone risked themselves for me." An intense silence filled the room, stretching for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he gave a single, slow nod. "One chance." That night, I went back to the diner for the first time in weeks. The place smelled the same, a mix of coffee and old grease. It sounded the same, with the quiet hum of the refrigerators and the clatter of plates, but I felt like a complete stranger there. The cook looked genuinely shocked to see me. We talked outside, in the dimly lit alley behind the building. I told him everything. Not the names, not the specific details, but the truth of the situation. He just broke down. He told me he was desperate, drowning in debt, afraid for his family, and I believed him. I really did. I told him he had to leave town that night, and never come back. He did. The next day, I went back to the office. The file was gone from the table. He looked at me, a different kind of expression in his eyes. "This time, you chose compassion," he said. It wasn't a question. I just nodded. He smiled, a rare, soft smile. "That's a rare quality in this world." but compassion has consequences, and that's where we'll pick up next time. I'm going to tell you about those consequences and how facing the cost of saving someone nearly ended everything for me. The cost came faster than I expected. Just 2 days after the cook disappeared, everything changed. Security tightened without any explanation. Doors were locked earlier, the hallways were watched longer, and people stopped smiling at me. That's when I knew. Someone had noticed. The call came late one night. He wanted me in his office. I remember walking in, the city lights behind him looking so sharp and cold, like 1,000 tiny knives. "You interfered," he said, his voice flat. I didn't deny it. "I told you there would be consequences. My only question was about the cook. Is he safe?" He gave a single slow nod. For now, that one phrase, "for now," cut deeper than any accusation. He explained what had happened. Someone much higher up had realized their precious stream of information had suddenly dried up. They started tracing it back. They didn't get the full picture, but they got enough. And when powerful people feel threatened, they don't just ask questions, they push back. Hard. I had to ask, "Am I in danger?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the sprawling city below. Finally, he turned back to me. "Yes," he said, "but not in the way you think." He explained they wouldn't attack me directly, not physically. That was too messy, too obvious. Instead, they would go after my credibility, my reputation. It would start with whispers, then carefully planted stories, anonymous sources raising doubts. "Once trust breaks," he said, "you become useless, powerless." True to his word, the first attack landed that very night. An article appeared on a niche financial blog, anonymous sources questioning his judgment, pointing to leaks within his inner circle. My role was mentioned. Not by name, but the description was so specific, it might as well have been. I felt sick to my stomach. The next day was a ghost town. Meetings I was supposed to be in were suddenly canceled. People who used to greet me with a handshake now couldn't even make eye contact. I felt like I was shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller with every passing hour. Right there in the open, and he just watched it all unfold, quietly observing from his corner office. That evening, he called me in again. The city lights were just as sharp. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and asked a single question. "Do you regret your choice?" I thought about the cook, the raw fear I saw in his eyes, that desperate, pleading look, and then I remembered the wave of pure relief that washed over his face when I told him to run, to just get out and never look back. I looked straight at him. "No," I said, my voice steady. He nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Then you're stronger than most," he said. "But you need to understand, strength attracts storms." The storm hit that weekend. A formal investigation was announced, citing pressure from investors, the board, key partners, and I, the unnamed but clearly implicated figure, became the easiest target, the perfect scapegoat. They wanted me gone. He laid it all out for me, the brutal, simple truth. If I stayed, the damage would spread. It would infect everything he had built. If I left, it would stop. The bleeding would be contained. I let out a bitter laugh. "So, this is it. This is how it ends." He looked tired then, truly exhausted for the first time since I'd known him. "This is how it always ends for people like you," he said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "Good people who wander into worlds filled with sharp edges." I asked him what he wanted, what his move was. He just said he wanted me to be safe, and for the first time, I saw it clearly in his eyes. Guilt. So, I packed again. A different bag this time, a much faster, colder goodbye. Before I walked out the door, he handed me a thick envelope. Inside was cash. A lot of it, enough to start over, somewhere far away. And folded inside was a small, handwritten note. Just 7 words. "You were never invisible to me." I left without looking back. I found a new city, a small apartment. I tried to go back to being normal, but normal didn't seem to fit me anymore. The silence was the loudest part. Weeks crawled by, turning into a month, then another. The money sat untouched. And then, one night it came. A knock on the door. Not a delivery, not a neighbor. It was a specific knock, a pattern I knew. The knock that would pull me right back into his world. But this time, I wouldn't be returning as the same person. This time, I knew the rules. The knock came late. So late, the entire city seemed to be holding its breath. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the dead silence of my tiny apartment. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The walls felt like they were closing in, every shadow a potential threat. Who could it be? My mind raced through a list of names, each one more unlikely than the last. With a deep breath that did little to calm my nerves, I crept to the door. My hand hesitated over the knob, a cold piece of metal separating me from the unknown. Finally, I twisted it and pulled the door open, just a crack. Nothing, just the empty, dimly lit hallway and the distant hum of the city. Then I looked down. A small, unassuming package sat on the welcome mat. It was light, almost weightless in my hand, but it felt heavy with unspoken promises and buried secrets. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside, there was no fancy gadget, no hidden message in invisible ink. Just a single, folded piece of paper. The handwriting was sharp, precise, and achingly familiar. Meet me at the old diner. Tomorrow night, alone. Just those few words were enough to unravel everything. A cold dread washed over me. I thought I had escaped that life, severed every connection, burned every bridge. But some threads, I was learning, are woven into the very fabric of who you are. They don't break. They just wait to be pulled. The next day was a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Every passing car, every stranger's glance, made me jump. By the time evening came, I felt like a frayed wire, ready to snap. I arrived at the diner early, needing the time to compose myself. From the outside, it looked exactly the same. The same flickering neon sign, the same cracked vinyl on the booths, the same scent of stale coffee and grease hanging in the air. But something was different. Or maybe, I was different. I slid into a booth in the far corner, the one with the clearest view of the door and the street. And I waited. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. Each minute felt like an hour. My coffee went cold. Just as I was about to convince myself it was all a cruel joke, the bell above the door chimed. And there he was. No disguise this time. No shadowy figure in a trench coat. It was just him, walking towards me with a calm certainty that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and seeing far too much. He slid into the booth opposite me without a word and placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. It was heavier, more substantial than any he had given me before. "Open it," he said, his voice a low rumble. I did. Inside, it wasn't just a target or a piece of intel. It was a life's worth of information. Detailed documents, blueprints, complex plans, a web of contacts, spanning continents. A life I had only ever glimpsed from the sidelines. A world I had only ever served. This time, he said, breaking the silence, "You are not just helping, you are leading." The words hit me like a physical blow. Leading. My stomach lurched. Leading meant responsibility. It meant danger, not just for me, but for everyone involved. It meant making decisions that could get people hurt, or worse. It meant having the weight of lives on my shoulders. I looked up at him, my disbelief clear on my face. He met my gaze, his eyes steady, unblinking. "I chose you because you see the truth," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm not ready for this," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You are ready," he insisted. "You're ready because you have survived things that would have broken most people. You've been forged in fires you don't even remember." We spent the next few hours poring over the contents of that folder. He walked me through every detail, every contingency plan, every potential pitfall. We talked about strategies and exit routes, safe houses and dead drops. He laid out the entire operation, a complex, high-stakes game of chess where every piece was a human life. By the time we were done, the diner was empty, and the first hints of dawn were painting the sky. I finally understood. There was no going back. This wasn't a mission I could accept or refuse. It was a path that had been laid out for me long ago, and I had just taken the final step onto it. As he stood to leave, he placed a hand on the folder, his final instruction, a simple, chilling warning. Trust no one, not completely. And then he was gone, melting back into the city's shadows as if he had never been there. I stayed in that booth long after he left, the folder feeling like a 1,000-pound weight on the table. I thought about my life, about all the choices, the lies, the small acts of defiance and courage that had led me to this exact moment. In this rundown diner, at the edge of a new and terrifying world, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration churned inside me. It felt like standing on the edge of a towering cliff, knowing that the only way forward was to jump, and that the fall would change absolutely everything. In that moment, I realized something profound. Life isn't about playing it safe, about building walls to keep the world out. It's about finding the strength to stand up when everything and everyone is trying to push you down. It's about facing the storm, not hiding from it. This was my storm, and I was about to walk right into the heart of it. My first mission as a leader is just around the corner. It's there that I'll truly understand the cost of power, in a way that will sear my soul and redefine who I am forever. Stay tuned, because the story is just beginning. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see what happens next, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss it. The mission came quietly, like a shadow sliding across the floor in the late afternoon sun. He handed me a folder, the same manila kind as before. Another one. He didn't speak. He never did, not at first. He just looked at me with those steady, unreadable eyes that seemed to see right through every wall I'd ever built. Inside were details, names, movements, connections, a web of information that made my head spin. I realized then, this was different. This was more than observation. More than just watching from a distance, a ghost in the machine. I was active now. I was part of the game, a piece on the board, whether I wanted to be or not. The first target wasn't a person, which surprised me. It was a situation, a delicate chain of decisions, A house of cards that could either collapse a small family-owned company or save the jobs of hundreds of people. He explained everything, his voice a low calm murmur that cut through the silence of the room. Step by step, he laid out the plan. I listened, absorbing every word, trying desperately not to let the panic rising in my chest show on my face. Then he said it, the words that changed everything. You were ready to act. My heart started racing, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands shook, and I quickly clasped them together in my lap, hoping he wouldn't notice. I had never done anything like this. My life was about routines, about blending in, about being utterly and completely ordinary. This was the opposite of ordinary. The hours that followed were a blur. I moved quietly through unfamiliar spaces, my footsteps barely making a sound. I spoke carefully, each word chosen with the precision of a surgeon. I made choices I didn't fully understand. Pulling levers and pushing buttons in a complex machine I could only see a tiny part of, but I followed the instructions, exactly to the letter. By the end of the day, it was over. The situation was resolved. No one was harmed. The right people got what they needed, and the wrong ones were left holding empty hands, wondering what had just happened. A clean, silent victory. He looked at me afterward. Back in that quiet room, his expression was as calm as ever, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. You did well, he said, and then, a slight pause. Better than expected. In those 4 words, a world of meaning passed between us. I realized then that the world he lived in, this realm of shadows and whispers, was nothing like mine, but I had taken my first real step into it. I had become a part of it. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the day's events. But it wasn't just today. Memories of the diner, of that very first envelope slipped across the table, of the initial lies and the small, seemingly insignificant choices, it all came flooding back. I thought of the cook I'd inadvertently saved weeks ago. A simple act of rerouting, a delivery that had prevented a disaster I didn't even know was coming. I thought of the strangers I had helped since then, their faces unknown to me, their lives touched by my invisible hand. And I thought of the people I had yet to meet, the lives I had yet to influence. A profound realization settled over me in the stillness of my apartment. Power and responsibility are inseparable. They are 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And every single act, no matter how small or hidden, has a consequence. A ripple that spreads outwards, touching shores you may never see. But I understood something else, too. Something more personal, more chilling. That night, I was no longer invisible. My actions had made me a real player, someone who could be seen, who could be tracked, someone who mattered. And in that moment of understanding, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never be the same again. The next part of this story, the final part, will reveal the full truth. The truth about him, the man in the shadows who pulled me into his world. It will uncover the real reason he chose me, why he trusted a complete nobody with tasks that could alter so many lives. And the choice I am forced to make will determine not only my future, but his as well. The game is far from over. In fact, it's just begun. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. I'd grown used to the tension, that electric hum in the air, the quiet asterisk before asterisk the action. But this new comp felt heavier than any storm I had ever weathered. It was a suffocating silence, a void where there used to be purpose, however dangerous it was. Then, one evening, he called me in. The office was empty, the lights dimmed low, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The only sound was the distant, muffled hum of the city outside, a world away from the one I now inhabited. Sit, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I did, perching on the edge of a leather chair that felt far too expensive for me. He didn't speak at first. He just studied me, his gaze intense, as if he were trying to see right through me, to read every thought, every fear I'd been holding on to. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the massive desk, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked, vulnerable. The mask of power, of unshakable control, had slipped. There is something I need to tell you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Something I should have told you from the very start. I held my breath and listened, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and then he told me. He told me everything. He unspooled the story of his life, how he had hidden his true identity for years, a ghost in his own existence. He explained why he had come to the diner that first day, a calculated move in a game I never knew I was playing. He revealed why he had trusted me, a complete stranger, above anyone else in his heavily fortified world. He spoke of a profound loneliness that clung to him like a shadow, of mistakes that haunted his every waking moment. He talked about the people who had betrayed him, the sting of their treachery still fresh, and the people he had to protect, a burden he carried alone. The weight of his words filled the room, heavy and real. He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. I chose you because you are human, he said, the words simple but earth-shattering, not powerful, not rich, not connected, but human. In that instant, everything clicked into place. All this time, it wasn't just about the tasks, the clandestine missions, or the dangerous secrets. It was about trust. It was about one person seeing another truly seeing them, beyond the surface, beyond the roles we play. It was about someone seeing the ordinary person behind the extraordinary circumstances and choosing to act with honesty and courage. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and unexpected. I didn't think I had any left. After everything I had seen, after everything I had done, I thought I was beyond feeling this way. A soft, sad smile touched his lips, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like the man I first met at the diner. Tired, guarded, but real. "You can walk away now," he said, his voice gentle. "No consequences. You can go back to your old life or, you can stay. Help me build a world where trust actually matters. Where people are seen for who they are, not for what they own or what they can do." I looked at him, really looked at him, and thought about everything. The sleepless nights filled with fear, the web of lies I had navigated, the impossible choices I had been forced to make, and I realized, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could never go back. The person I was before all this, she didn't exist anymore. "I'll stay," I said, my voice firm. From that moment on, everything changed. I wasn't just an asset or a pawn anymore. I was a partner. I became part of something bigger than I had ever imagined, a fight for a future that was far from certain but filled with purpose. And I knew, without a doubt, that the world would never see me the same way again, because the world he lived in, the world I had chosen, was dangerous, yes, but it was also the only place I could truly be seen. I would never be invisible again.